Let this represent 1 million naira. This is what 10 million naira would look like. This is what 100 million naira would look like. And this is what 1 billion naira would look like. Femi Otedola, founder, Zenon Petroleum, and 16th richest man in Africa, borrowed 150 times this amount of money. But in 2008, he lost everything. Imagine standing on top of a multi-billion-dollar empire and seeing everything collapse with you. For many, this is a death sentence, as they may not live to see it all. For Femi Otedola, he saw it all. Everything collapsed before him. But he decided to rebuild again. In Lagos of the early 2000s, wealth had many names, but one in particular carried the weight of power, ambition, and glamour: Femi Otedola. The son of Michael Otedola, a former governor of Lagos State, Femi was not born into poverty, but his rise into billionaire status was not inherited. It was built on audacity, timing, and a taste for risk. It was something he took for himself. By the time 2009 rolled around, Otedola had become the face of Nigerian capitalism. He controlled Zenon Petroleum and Gas, a company that had, in less than a decade, become the single most dominant power in diesel supply across Nigeria. Diesel was the lifeblood of the economy. Telecom towers needed it. Banks needed it. Industries needed it. Even households depended on it to run their noisy, smoke-belching generators. Everyone needed it. In a country where the national power grid was more often in darkness than in light, Otedola's empire supplied the fuel that kept the economy running. His rise was meteoric. He skyrocketed. His friends and rivals in the business elite watched in awe as he moved effortlessly from deal to deal. His personal life reflected the excesses of a global billionaire. A private jet for quick trips between Lagos and London, a yacht that cut through the Mediterranean waters, luxury homes in London's most exclusive neighborhoods. Forbes estimated his wealth at $1.2 billion, officially crowning him a billionaire. And Otedola himself did not hide the grandeur of that era. Looking back years later, he admitted with disarming honesty, "I was living the billionaire's life. Jets, yachts, luxury home, anything I wanted, I could get." But in business, triumphs are often fragile, and Otedola's empire was built on a terrain that could quake without warning. That quake came in 2008 when the world economy crashed and he plummeted downwards.
1.7% here, a loss of 37 points or so. Apple shares are just getting hammered this morning.
We're down by between 3 and 4.5% generally across these markets.
The global financial crisis swept across continents, toppling banks, crippling industries, and sinking currencies. Nigeria, heavily dependent on oil exports, was not spared. The price of crude oil collapsed, and with it, the fragile web of credit that held up much of Nigeria's corporate sector. Zenon Petroleum had borrowed aggressively from Nigerian banks, as had Otedola's other interests. By 2009, his companies collectively owed over $1.2 billion. Suddenly, the banks that had once lined up to fund his ambitions came knocking, demanding repayment. Femi Otedola recalls the crash as more than just a financial setback. It was a nightmare without end. He had borrowed billions of dollars at an exchange of 117 naira to $1, only to be forced to repay at 165 naira following the naira's devaluation. At the time, crude oil prices plunged from $147 per barrel to $34. While the Nigerian stock markets collapsed, his company had shiploads of diesel on the high seas worth over $500 million, purchased at peak prices, but by the time they arrived, the value had crashed. All told, he said, "I lost more than $1.3 billion, about 220 billion naira, through devaluation of the naira. the plunge in oil, and the stock market crash. What made the pain sharper was a sudden shift in his relationships with the banks. Just months earlier, Otedola was their darling. Executives had courted him, eager to lend, deposit, and deal. He recalled with irony how they would send bewitching ladies to make their offers more convincing. But when the tide turned, those same banks sent barrel-chested men to his gate, menacing reminders that debts were due. Yet, Otedola did not spare himself the shame. He admits it was not only the global crash but also his own poor decisions and lack of a solid management structure that dragged him to the brink. If I had better advisors, he reflected, I would have hedged with the banks and spread the risk. Instead, I bore the brunt all alone. The debts were staggering. He owed Access Bank 25 billion naira, Zenon 75 billion naira, GTB 38 billion naira, UBA 33 billion naira, FCMB 26 billion naira, Intercontinental 14 billion naira, Union 5 billion naira, and Bank PHB 6 billion naira, altogether about 220 billion naira. He described how the then managing director of Access Bank and his deputy, Herbert Wigwe, came to his office one day. Mr. Otedola, you have to shed weight, they told him matter-of-factly. He thought at first they were speaking about his body, only to realize they meant his assets. Friendship evaporated in an instant. To them, he was just another debtor. Faced with bankruptcy, the elder brother of shame, as he called it, Otedola made a painful decision to sell nearly everything. His vast property portfolio of about 150 flats across Lagos, Port Harcourt, and Abuja. His land and storage tank farms were all handed over. He gave up prized properties on Bodleian Road in Ikoyi and Maitama, Abuja, which included 52 flats, 2 mansionettes, and 8 townhouses. He relinquished shares in Mobil, Texaco, Visafone, and even his position as the largest individual shareholder in African Finance Corporation. He had ordered a Bombardier Global 5,000 jets for $65 million. But before he could take delivery, he handed the papers over to Amcon as part of his settlement. It was like watching something precious you've built collapse in on you, he said. Something you created, felt strongly about, and had your whole life wrapped up in, and you could do nothing to stop it. In the end, the banks agreed to a haircut, writing off 80 billion naira, while Amcon bought the remainder of his debts for 114 billion naira. Otedola had given up nearly everything, but he cleared his name. Looking back, he reflects, even the darkest clouds have a silver lining. The death of Zenon led to the rebirth of Femi Otedola. I was either going to be buried or rise from the dead. I chose to rise. Many thought it was the end. In Nigeria, fallen billionaires rarely rise again. The country's business history is littered with once powerful names who vanished after a crash. Otedola, people whispered, was finished. But they underestimated this man. They had no idea he was about to prove them wrong. For Otedola, the early 2010s were years of quiet struggle. He was no longer the host of Forbes. He was the debtor-in-chief. The Central Bank of Nigeria's banking reforms only worsened the pressure as banks tried to recover bad loans and balance their books. This was a period when mockery replaced envy. Stories circulated of how the mighty had fallen. A few laughed at how the once flashy billionaire was liquidating assets just to survive. Business associates distanced themselves. The Nigerian press, which once praised his flamboyance, now ran headlines of debts and decline. But Otedola was not idle. He knew he was down, but he decided he wasn't going to stay down. While others counted him out, he was negotiating, restructuring, and quietly plotting a comeback. He sold assets to repay debts and restructured Zenon's obligation with Nigerian banks. He leaned heavily on his stake in African Petroleum, though it had lost much of its value, and began repositioning it. It was in this crucible of humiliation and difficulty that Otedola's philosophy of wealth began to evolve. No longer was money the measure of success. He began to speak in terms of resilience, of character, of survival. He had tasted both extreme billionaire's excess and financial ruin. The turning point came when he decided to take what was left of African Petroleum and transform it. In 2010, he rebranded it as Fort Oil and began restructuring the company. The gamble was audacious, Nigeria's downstream oil sector was notoriously corrupt, fraught with regulatory battles, subsidy controversies, and erratic government policies. But Otedola doubled down. Fort Oil began modernizing its operations, increasing transparency, and improving customer service. While rivals struggled, Fort began to recover. The global oil market also slowly stabilized. By 2013, Otedola had not only cleared his debt with Nigerian banks, but had also repositioned Fort Oil as a serious player in the downstream sector. The phoenix was beginning to rise. In 2014, Forbes restored his name to the billionaires lists. His net worth was estimated at over $1 billion once again, thanks largely to the resurgence of Fort Oil and smart investments in power generation. The man who had been written off had clawed his way back into the club of billionaires. But for Otedola, the second act was different from the first. He no longer flaunted jets and yachts. He had been humbled by the fire of failure. In 2016, Forbes confirmed him again as a billionaire, cementing his comeback. It wasn't luck. It was grit, strategy, and patience. By the late 2010s, Otedola's tone had changed. In interviews and speeches, he no longer glorified wealth as accumulation of things. Instead, he emphasized the fleeting nature of material possessions. He once said in a reflective comment, "Money is not the true measure of a man. I know because I had it, I lost it, and I got it back. What matters is your character, your resilience, and your ability to adapt." The shift wasn't just rhetoric. Otedola began divesting from Fort Oil, selling his controlling stake in 2019. He redirected his focus towards power generation and philanthropy. For him, it was no longer just about being rich. It was about making an impact. He donated generously to causes ranging from healthcare to education. One of his most famous gestures was a $5 billion donation to save children.
Everyone is talking about this amount of money that you've given away to charity. Why give out so much money to charities?
In my life, in my journey, I've taken the risk, I've done the chase, I've enjoyed the thrill, I've achieved success and recognition. What next?
The single largest individual donations in Nigerian history. The flamboyant spender of the 2000s had evolved into a measured elder statesman of Nigerian capitalism. The story of Femi Otedola is not just about wealth, it's about resilience. He tasted the sweetness of unimaginable success, the bitterness of failure, and the rare redemption of a comeback. His life captures the volatility of Nigeria's economy, where fortunes can be made overnight and lost just as quickly. It also captures something universal, that true wealth lies not in the size of one's bank account, but in the strength of one's character. He once said, reflecting on his journey, "When you lose money, you learn. You understand that money is not everything. Wealth is character, and once you have that, you can always come back." For the young dreamer in Nigeria, Otedola's story is a beacon. It tells them that failure is not final, that resilience can build empires, and that the ultimate goal of wealth is not to hoard, but to give back. Looking back now, Otedola's life reads like the story of a man who walked through fire and came out unrefined. In his own words, "I had everything, then I had nothing. Today, I am grateful not for the money, but for the journey." And perhaps that is the true legacy of Femi Otedola. Not the billions he once made, not the billions he lost, but the character that endured, and the lessons that will outlast the zeros in any bank account.